Hi, everybody. Welcome to the fourth live stream of the week. Oh, my goodness. I was going to do a spoiler review for the Bone Temple today, but the combination of working so late yesterday on the Kathleen Kennedy news, but then also a real lack of interest in the Bone Temple. I think that the last movie, 28 years later, might have done more damage than we had suspected. We're going to be talking about that on Movie Math on Sunday. Hey, Quick Draw, that's a nice use of your name. I like that. But I'm surprised at how it's not really materializing. Perhaps Nia DaCosta, let's hope things work out well for her. I think she did a tremendous job on the film. So we'll see what happens. Everyone who sees it likes it, but a lot of people feel, I guess, they got burned too badly on the last one. So that's tough. That's really tough. I'm glad you like my sweater. It's very cold. Oh, that's very sweet of you, X-Men superfan. That's very kind of you. That's very, very nice. All right, so we have some really great stories to go over today. The first two in particular are very well nuanced. Oh, wow, again, X-Men superfan. Very generous. Oh, no, that's... oh, there they are. Those are the ones you dropped. That's so nice of you. You liked my Texas-sized hair yesterday? I'm pretty close to it today. That hair was kind of crazy yesterday. Even when I was going over the videos, I was like, damn. Okay, so we have some great stuff to go over, okay? As I said, the first two stories are very nuanced. I think they're great discussions, not only about the topics, but the business aspects of it. I'm very excited to have those conversations with you. And then the third story is kind of like a fun story. I don't think there's quite as much to discuss there. And then, of course, at the end of the stream, we'll do the usual, the Ask Me Anything. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, story number one. Hold on. Story number one. Boop. Oh, what's going on? Well, of course, one thing that's not included here is that, oh, thank you, Julio, is that David Ellison's going on a European road trip to try and convince European governments not to approve the Netflix Warner Brothers deal. Because it's not something that not only the US government has to approve it, but every country where Netflix plays has to approve it. And that is, I mean, that's a viable way to go. I mean, it's like, it's interesting. But you know, it could work. It could work. And you'll see why as we actually have this discussion. When we talk about the Sony deal at the bottom, you'll be surprised as to why he might actually have I think the Sony deal actually strengthens his position. Very much so. Okay, so here we go. So I want a lot of times when we talk these days about the Warner Brothers Netflix deal, you guys are like, hey man, what actually is going to happen, right? Would it actually be that bad? And I want to talk about what the plans are that they've said, and then the reality of what might actually happen. You know, we always talk about pay attention not to what they say, but what they do. And so I think some real questions, not just from how it affects you, but in ways that it affects you that you don't realize, how it affects the industry and therefore eventually you as well. All right, so I think the first thing I think we're really wondering two things, you know, as from the consumer perspective. What's going to happen to HBO? What's going to happen to the theatrical release model? So with HBO, they've made it pretty clear that they're going to do, starting out like what Disney Plus has done with Hulu. So yes, because when I brought this up the other day, one of you was like, dude, HBO Max is going to remain its own thing and you'll be able to subscribe to it if you want. Well, that's right, with digital and physical, Lloyd, as well. I know that's a big question some of you have as well. So Hulu is its own app. You can subscribe to just Hulu. However, Hulu is also available through Disney Plus. I believe that you have to be subscribed to both to get the Hulu content through your Disney Plus subscription in the United States. You know, it's interesting, Danny, you say that not in Latin America. We're going to talk about this a little bit with the Sony thing at the end of this conversation, but that's another thing. A lot of HBO content plays on different distributors overseas, right? So, would HBO become an internet? I mean, HBO would have to honor its current contracts, but they probably wouldn't be renewed. Sky in the UK, for instance, airs HBO's content over there. And Netflix obviously would not renew that deal. So that's a big concern for the British government because that would really hurt one of their own companies. So that's a big issue. A24 might stick with this because A24 could still just do a deal with Netflix, I guess, then. So yes, so HBO, Disney Plus and HBO, so HBO and Netflix would remain separate, but what Netflix wants to do is to add more value to Netflix by making the HBO content available there as well. So you're kind of looking at the kind of integration that goes on with Hulu and Disney Plus. And, you know, Bob Iger's been very transparent about it. Eventually, he doesn't want Hulu to exist on its own, and it just becomes another shingle on Disney Plus, you know, especially because Disney now owns it in full. Now, not only is that an issue for HBO in terms of where you find the content, but it's been brought up that it would create a streaming juggernaut. You know, people only have so much money that they can spend on streaming. And, you know, people often choose Netflix and maybe, you know, HBO, I think we suspect we don't know how many subscribers it actually has. Not only because it seems to be a real issue of its availability globally, as many of you are pointing out, but you know, it has trouble getting its shows on the Nielsen charts. But I agree. As Mexican Nacho says, why would you subscribe to anything else if you could get a Netflix HBO bundle? And I think that's a real concern about competition. You know, how would you, a lot of you are bringing up the Conjuring prequel. There's no information about it except for the fact that it's been dated and they have a director. But there's no news about who's going to appear in it, which is why I didn't make it a story. But I'm glad you guys are excited about it. I'm excited about it as well. We're going to talk about the Conjuring just a little bit when we get to a little bit further down in this story. What about the HBO channel? Well, you know, some of the things you don't realize is that there are contractual obligations. HBO has old school contracts, and so those would have to run the course, but of course, eventually they would have to come up for renewal, and Netflix would not renew them. So that's kind of, you would be looking at, it would take quite a long time to eventually slowly shut HBO down and assimilate it into Netflix, but that would be the long-term goal. So yes, you would create a streaming juggernaut, which would be very difficult for other streaming services to compete with, which is a real concern. Then there's also competition, as I said, and price point. So the competition aspect as to whether or not any other streaming service could survive against such a juggernaut. And then also, that's right, it's basically a monopoly, Danny, as you're saying there. They could set a very high price point if they are able to offer so much content. And then not only does their amount of content become an issue in terms of competition, but so does their price. So if they raise their price so much that viewers still feel it's worth it because they get Netflix and HBO, then people have even less money to spend on other streaming services. So it becomes, but also I think it becomes a real problem for the consumer because, you know, competition works in the consumer's interest in terms of regulating the price. But if there's no competition, Netflix can charge whatever they want as long as the market will abide by it. And they'll test to see how far they can push you. Okay, now let's talk the big question about the theatrical window. And that's why this is a story today, because this morning, the New York Times published an interview. Big day for covering interviews. We're covering George R.R. Martin's interview from yesterday and Ted Sarandos' interview from today. So he went in and he did this really big article with the New York Times. And the reason he did it, make no mistake, is that he's campaigning. He's campaigning to get his deal approved. Okay? So he says, Ted Sarandos says critics just misunderstand Netflix. Do they? I think we understand it quite well. And there are a lot of questions that he isn't answering. You know, I think right now he's really advocating in the court of public opinion, but he's not really answering what's going on behind the scenes, as you're going to say when I bring up these industry questions. So there are two quotes that I want to point out. from the article. The first is here, which was interesting. He said the general economics of the theatrical business were more positive than we had seen and had modeled for ourselves. It's a healthy, profitable business for them, Warner Brothers. We aren't in that business not because we hated it. We weren't in that business because our business was doing so well. So that is not what people have said about Ted Sarandos. People have said that he is very against the theatrical model, and he has always been very vocal, he and other Netflix executives, about putting their customers first. And they said that their customer expects the content right away, and they have a concern that their customer would not sign up for Netflix if Netflix content wasn't made available to them as soon as possible. That was one of the things they said, just a few years ago when asked about their theatrical windows. I also think it points to the fact that for a lot of the Netflix films, they're not very good, right? Like, he's framing it as, we were making so much money via streaming, we didn't even think about making money at the theatrical window. And to that, I would say, I don't know about that. I think that's an interesting point. I would also say that while Warner Brothers has to be very transparent about their, everybody has to be transparent because they have stock. But the problem is that Warner Brothers has individual product. So they have to be very transparent about how each movie performs. And even then, Hollywood has always been famous for fudging the math. That's why you always want a cut of the gross, not the profit, because on paper, nothing in Hollywood ever turns a profit because they don't want to pay anybody anything. And that's the same for Netflix. In terms of Netflix's numbers, nobody watches anything because they don't want to pay you anything. They want to pay you residuals. Netflix is a subscriber business model. They only have to talk to you about their subscribership. They don't really have to report how much they paid and what nobody knows if they make their money back on a show or a series because that's not how they report their finances. They're just, how many subscribers do they have? That's all anybody ever talks about with them. And of course, their spending and their revenue, but it's not done by project or by space. They're up until now, Netflix for like 99% has only been in one business, and that's the streaming business. So I think it's interesting that that's what they said. They said Warner Brothers is making a lot of money. But the thing is like, how much do you make, Netflix? I didn't even think to look that up. Let's look at how much Netflix pulls in. So Warner Brothers in the theatrical business pulled in $4.4 billion worldwide. So how much did Netflix make in revenue last year? Okay, so Netflix's full revenue was $39 billion. That's 10 times what Warner Brothers brought in releasing movies. So that is no wonder that they're not into the theatrical model. You look at $4 billion and you go, wow, that's the second biggest, most successful studio in Hollywood after Disney's $6 billion, a little over $6 billion. And then no wonder everybody wants to get into streaming. Although Disney has multiple businesses and I'm sure is making a lot of money from theme parks, etc. But that's crazy. They're going to prioritize streaming every single time because they're looking to grow that number. They're looking to grow the $39 billion revenue. They want to grow their subscribership through Warner Brothers IP, which I have right here. That's the Warner Brothers IP. They want to put that on Netflix so you sign up. They want to put HBO on Netflix so they get more and more subscribers. How many subscribers does Netflix have? Let's see. That's the thing. You can't let these people snowball you with nice little comments and a fancy little interview, okay, in the New York Times. So they have 300 million, a little over 300 million paid subscribers. There are billions of people on the planet. How many people are on the planet? Are in the world. Okay, 8 billion. So there's a lot of room for growth. And I think streaming services feel they've hit a ceiling. Like they've gotten all the subscribers that are out there to get, because Netflix is leading the pack. So how do they break through to the next level? I think their feeling is with something like Warner Brothers and also combining with HBO. And that's how they, I think that's another reason that Netflix finally, this is such an interesting conversation. I think this is the reason Netflix finally decided to bite the bullet and buy a big studio because, they've hit this wall, and that's right. There's definitely piracy. But Netflix is going to get more and more aggressive, especially, their stock market depends on their performance. And if Wall Street doesn't see growth in subscribership, and I think they said they were going to stop reporting subscribership actually, and only revenue, but they have to have revenue also get higher. Revenue has to increase. They have to report something to Wall Street. And so they're like, how can we get this number bigger? We're already the biggest in the game, but how can we push the ceiling higher? They're hitting their head on the ceiling. And I think it's through fighting piracy, but also acquiring Warner Brothers and HBO. That's a really big deal. So it's hilarious that he says, oh, look how much money. Isn't that cute? Aren't you adorable, Warner Brothers? Look at you making $4 billion. Aw, that's so cute. And they make 10 times that. 10 times. What did Mexican Nacho say that was so funny? That is funny. They are getting more aggressive. My family was sharing a Netflix account and they finally were like, I don't think you're where we think you are. And so I had to, I was happy to do it, but I had to add on a gift subscription to my subscription. So before I just created an extra profile, but now I had to do one of those and I thought it was hilarious. They were like, do you want to gift an account to somebody with ads on it? And I'm like, what kind of a gift would that be? I'd be like, here, watch this with ads. So, so I think it's an extra $9 a month to get around password sharing. And they're like, gotcha. Okay, so very, very interesting. Then his next quote, he had another quote. So this is what everybody's talking about when they said they're going to do the 45-day window. But again, pay attention to what he says. So he says, when this deal closes, we will own a theatrical distribution engine that is phenomenal and produces billions of dollars of theatrical revenue that we don't want to put at risk. It's not very important to them, though, because it's so much less than what their streaming service makes. We will run the business largely. He didn't say exactly like it is today. Whenever anybody says to you, yeah, I'm basically going to do what you're doing. Ho, 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 ho. That's not going to go the way you think it is, okay? Be very careful with words like largely, even in your own life, okay? And then it says with 45-day windows. He says, I'm giving you a hard number. Yeah, but largely like it is today. And we're going to talk about where he might kind of get around that. He says, if we're going to be in the theatrical business, and we're competitive people. We want to win. I want to win opening weekend. I want to win box office. But what does he do with the movies that aren't probably going to be winners? That's what we're going to be discussing. If he's only in it to make big blockbuster movies that make lots, if he's not in it for the love of cinema, and many people have said Ted Sarandos does not value the theatrical experience, then I'm worried what that's going to do to certain films. And I think it's also concerning as to there won't be any surprises, right? Movies that you didn't think would do well, shockingly do well. As I've said before, would Ted Sarandos ever put weapons in a theatrical situation? That is a real concern. That's right. Classic movie lover had the same thought. It's, I think, a big concern. I think what he's saying is like, I'm going to put Superman on the big screen because I want it to be a big hit and I want that #1 weekend. But I also want to really boost my streaming. That's right. The Bride, Wuthering Heights. These movies would never go to theatrical. Okay? So we're going to talk about it. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. But you see how this is starting to come together. I think it's fascinating. Now, of course, Universal has the 30 to 17-day window thing. 30 days for blockbusters, only 17 days for flops. And it's worked very well for Universal. It's worked incredibly well. But I think that when you stick the name Netflix on it, and everybody knows that Warner Brothers owns Netflix, I think mentally it's going to change how people see the project. They're going to be like, oh, that's a Netflix movie, right? So I think there's some concern to that. Warner Brothers really copied Universal's model because, Zazie loves the buck, and he saw how much money Universal was making. Now, my question is, will Warner Brothers be totally independent? That's what I would want to know. I'd be like, do you just own Warner Brothers and they're allowed to function as they are now? Or are you going to take the distribution model that they have set up, the engine, and just move it over to Netflix? Right? Like, that's what I want to know. I think if he said that Warner Brothers was going to remain exactly as it is with all the employees they currently have, only it would be owned by Netflix, we'd all feel a lot better. But I don't think any of us believe that's going to be the case. I think that he wants the money that Warner Brothers makes, but I think he wants to strip down what it costs to make that. But can you still make the money that Warner Brothers makes without those people? That's very interesting. Now, here's what I really want to discuss. How would Netflix decide which movies go to theaters? So let's talk about that. So I have a good little picture here. Thanks, Echelon. I like this. All right, so let's take a look at this. So here's the puny little bit of money that Warner Brothers made. So they were the first studio of the year to get to $4 billion worldwide until Disney leapfrogged over them at the end of the year with Zootopia 2 and Avatar 3. They made $4.4 billion worldwide and $1.9 billion domestic. I mean, again, I'm sure Netflix is like, that's so cute and adorable. Look at you making money over there. Good for you. So cute. All right. So then, but let's look at the movies. So I've divided these as to how I think they would go to theaters. I think they'd probably send a Ryan Coogler movie to theaters. But I don't even know about The Conjuring, to be honest with you. But I think you're looking at a place where these movies, so that's the thing. Nobody ever thought The Conjuring would make as much money as it did. Look at that. $500 million. That's incredible. Okay, for a little movie that didn't cost that much money. That is a real crazy situation. And I don't know if it ever would have happened if Netflix was behind the choices of which movies go to theaters and which movies go to Netflix. So you put Minecraft, F1, Superman, and maybe Sinners because of Ryan Coogler. Although maybe it becomes like Frankenstein with Guillermo del Toro. 17 days in theaters and then right to oh yeah, Clayface. You know, I got so upset the other day. I saw one of the trades talking about which movies they thought would do well in 2026. And they actually said, who even knows who Clayface is? And I got so angry. I got so upset. I was like, there are a decent number of Batman fans, and we all, even if you're just a casual comic book fan, I mean, my parents, because I watched the Batman animated series growing up, my parents know who Clayface is. So that was just insane to me. So yes, but that's just the Hollywood that you're dealing with, okay? It's really strong lack of understanding when it comes to fans, and they don't want to try and fix it. They're like, hey, have you tried talking to the fans? And they're like, ooh, and you're like, I think it would help you considerably. Okay, all right, so I don't think any of these movies, and this is the real shocker, I think One Battle After Another would get the treatment that Netflix gives to all of its awards films. House of Dynamite, Frankenstein, Jay Kelly, Train Dreams, Knives Out, Wake Up Dead Man. I think that would have happened to One Battle After Another. But One Battle After Another, while it didn't make a ton of money, okay, is really an incredible theatrical experience. Oh, look at Shiny got a membership. I love it. Like, that's really scary, you know? Like, and you know, Tyroid says Netflix needs to learn from Stranger Things. You can't pump out typical Netflix quality junk. Oh, that's true. I think that's very true. And, you know, and I think they view putting Stranger Things in theaters as a stunt, a publicity stunt, because I guarantee you it was much more value on their streaming service. And then Raphael says, but if movie awards require theatrical release, wouldn't Hollywood talent to refuse to work with Netflix? Well, here's the problem. That's a good question. First of all, Netflix awards movies do get a theatrical release. All the movies I just said to you were in a limited run of theaters for 17 days. And I think that One Battle After Another would get the same treatment, which is really sad. That's right, Mystic. They gave Stranger Things out for free. They didn't even need that money. That's how little theatrical means to Netflix. They're like, you keep that $20, AMC. You're cute too. You guys are all so adorable over here with your puny little numbers. But here's the other thing. You couldn't necessarily refuse to work with Netflix, because if Netflix bought the second biggest studio in Hollywood, you don't have enough people to go to for projects. So you would start to be in a situation where you couldn't say you wouldn't work with another studio. Christopher Nolan would have that luxury because he's Christopher frickin' Nolan. But if you were an up and coming director, you just need to make movies. And so you would not be able to say, I mean, you might say, I would prefer not to, but are you really going to say that and have Netflix maybe hear that and not be willing to give you a deal? You know, I mean, they would just like they would become too powerful to the consumer, they would become too powerful to the creative. So this is a real concern. Now let's, on that note, jump to the industry questions, which are also really, really important. So, back-end deals. There would be no more back-end deals, right? Although on the new movie R.I.P., recently Ben Affleck and Matt Damon said that they had cut a deal to make sure that the crew members who worked on the R.I.P. got back-end or some kind of rewards, because they felt they should participate in the success of the film that they worked on, even though it was a Netflix movie. But you would be at the mercy of the stars of your project advocating for you. Not everybody is a Matt Damon or a Ben Affleck or a Taylor Swift. Danny, a back-end deal is that you get residuals. It means that you would get every time, like I still get I mean, it's down to like a couple of dollars at this point, but I'm still getting checks for Zombieland 2, and I had like 3 lines. So whenever the movie plays on any place where it's a pay value, right? Where if it's licensed to a streaming service or if it's licensed to hotels or airplanes, if they sell physical media, they give me a small little percentage of that, even though I only had a couple of lines, and everybody who worked on that film gets a cut, from the actors to the people in the crew. You know, if your union protects that for you. But here's the thing, Netflix never leases out its content to anyone else. It only exists on Netflix. So if a Warner Brothers film does go into theaters, the big difference is that after its theatrical run, whatever that might be, it's going to go onto Netflix, and it will not sell anywhere. It won't sell to airplanes. It won't sell to hotels. It won't sell to other streaming services. It won't have any physical media, because Netflix wants you to watch it on their streaming service. And they can't give you a cut of something that doesn't exist, because nobody pays for any content individually. You're simply a subscriber. So that's a real problem for the industry. And all that revenue, I mean, this might be nothing. This might be peanuts to Netflix, but it is a lifeline to so many other people in the business. Next, as I said, what about the streaming rights? Not only will this hurt people who work on these projects, but what about who else could have licensed them? How is all the other streaming services out there, and also all the other cable channels in other countries, how are they supposed to make money if there's suddenly so much less content to get a hold of? What are they going to offer to their viewers? If this huge movie studio starts putting all of their content and all their IP, and by the way, Warner Brothers not only makes movies, but shows, etc., and that suddenly all goes to Netflix, what is Sky going to do? That's going to be a huge chunk of one of the incentives to subscribe to them, right? So that's a big problem. Then also here, this is really interesting. So Sony is still doing an old school deal. The Jeremiah says, do you think purchasing Warner Brothers would help Netflix with awards? I don't know. I don't know. It depends if there's people feel there's just nothing they can do about it at the end of the day. I think people at first would be kind of upset about it. But yeah, so here we go. All right. So the Sony deal. So Netflix just signed a $7 billion deal with Sony to get the first pay one window. Means that after, so to give you the lingo, so after a movie's in theatrical, it then goes to digital release, where it's available on Apple Movies, Fandango Movies, Prime Video, wherever you have to pay for it, right? Then its pay one window is where it goes after that, right? So it goes right there. So as soon as it's done on digital, it would go to Netflix if it's a Sony movie. So that's what they paid for. So now, I think also Sony has had a great relationship with Netflix for a while now. Also, you know, K-pop Demon Hunters was a deal between the two of them. Yeah, that's right, Dancing Dog 60. That's why the Spider-Man films go to Netflix. Now, this is where it gets really scary. So, why did they pay $7 billion? What made this deal suddenly worth so much more? The global rights. Previously, Netflix only had the digital pay one distribution rights to Sony movies domestically. And these movies would go to other companies worldwide. Now, for this new deal, Sony had considered going with Amazon for their worldwide distribution outside of domestic. Netflix would have the movies domestically, Amazon would have them worldwide. But Netflix said, we will give you $7 billion to be the exclusive home globally for Sony movies after digital, after theatrical and digital. And Sony was like, $7 billion? Let's do it. But look at the loss for everybody else. And this is something that David Ellison can bring up when he's going around to all the other European countries. And he'd say, that is money that was taken out of your country's pocket. Because Netflix is something that, that's right, Faye, unaware of Netflix's game. So this is something that could have been paid to a company in your country, but instead it's just the international arm of Netflix. And that, I think, starts to become a real issue, right? But they are definitely, Adam's Fear, growing their business. And that's right, Mystic, this $7 billion price tag is more than Disney. That's a great point. I love that. So everybody was like, oh my gosh, for like the second year in a row, Disney made over $6 billion, right? And that, by the way, was only revenue. It wasn't their profit because they had to spend a lot of money to make that money. This is all profit because they're just paying for the rights. So Sony just got $7 billion with, just right. They don't have to deduct anything from it. It's just, they just got a huge chunk of change. And that's incredible. So you have a situation where, Hollywood has always been very powerful, but in other countries, there have been other businesses that have succeeded and done well, as being the affiliate that the Hollywood works with. But now you're going to get a situation, because the digital technology has shrunk the world, where Netflix is a global conglomerate, and you're not going to be able to have any companies rise up in other countries. And where is going to be the headquarters? Netflix doesn't need to have a home office that's very big in your country. They can run everything from California. And so this is a real issue as well. All right, so that's the problem, and that's what's going on, and that's kind of the situation. And I think it's really fascinating. All right, so let me ask you any questions about this before we get to all the George R.R. Martin drama. Raphael says, in Italy, Sky used to get most users because of soccer. They are more scared of DAZN and Amazon. Well, Amazon's trying to do the same thing. Amazon and Netflix are in a race. They're also trying to get sporting events and stuff like that. And the reason they get it is they say, hey, we have a global reach. Oh, did I miss your super chat one? Let me go back and try and find it. Can't the Academy make a rule that in order to qualify, it needs at least 30 days? That's a great comment, Juan. I'm glad I went back and saw it. They most certainly could. And that could be a way they combat this. They could say you must do 30 days or 45 days. They can say you must do 45 days as a theatrical exclusive. It can't be day and date to qualify. And that wouldn't help every movie, but at least it would help awards fair. What about taxes, Heinz E-Adventures? Well, unfortunately, the government often cuts big corporations a break. Lloyd, there is no information about WB Games. I shudder to think what might be happening in that sector. They're not at all a part of this conversation, which I'm sure must be making them very concerned. At least not publicly. We have no idea what kind of conversation might be happening behind the scenes. Stephen Turner says, what's upsetting about, they'll probably, if the worst comes to worst, I can't think of anything that they could do besides sell it, maybe. And so maybe they, but I'm not sure, it's a tough situation. Stephen says, what's upsetting about all these mergers is less voices at the top means possibly less diverse types of stories told where there's less competition. Yes, it's a real problem. That's why Hollywood's so upset about it. iReady says, can't they just force Netflix to release stuff in theaters and be done with this mess? It's ridiculous. I don't know. I mean, you could force them in terms of the rules of the Academy, but I don't know how you could force them otherwise. I mean, they'd have to make a rule, like a legal rule, and I don't know if you can rule like that on an industry about how a product must be sold and distributed. And even so, Netflix, just like all the other tech companies, really lobby like crazy. They spend so much money so that there's no oversight. Dancing Dog 60 says, like Michael says in The Godfather, it's not personal, Sony, it's strictly business. Netflix is also going to raise prices. For sure they're going to raise prices. I'm already shocked at how much I pay for Netflix. I was going through to do for my taxes and looking at my expenses for the year, and I was like, my goodness, that's a lot every month. Joe says, does that Sony deal only apply to new releases or apply to the past? Would Disney's agreement be in jeopardy? No, it's just new releases. Pay one window. You know, Sony doesn't have a streaming service. So where are their movies going to go after they're on digital? The answer is they go to Netflix. All right, we talked about this for almost 40 minutes. I told you these are deep dives. Now let's move over to George R.R. Martin. Okay. But that was a really great conversation. I had a good time talking to you guys about it. All right, story number 2. Boop. Oh, I love this. It's so fun. As you can see, I've already called someone a messy biatch. They're all messy biatches. This is hilarious. It's the Real Housewives of Westeros. Okay, so George R.R. Martin did a really great interview in The Hollywood Reporter. And thank you to those of you who told me to read it yesterday. You were like, have you seen this? And I wasn't sure I was going to read it because I'd seen a couple of blurbs from it online. But then I liked this cover, Make It Rain, but with rain like a king's reign. I was like, that's fantastic. I was like, I better go read that. And I read it this morning and I thought it was really, really interesting. So what's interesting particularly is that he's doing this interview to promote A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which doesn't have a lot of buzz, which is a real shame because it's one of the greatest, as I said, it's one of the finest things that HBO has ever produced. And I'm concerned that it's not getting more attention. Hopefully it will once people actually start to see it. But that's the whole reason he's doing this interview. And he took the opportunity to kind of torpedo House of the Dragon season 3. So they said in this very article that HBO executives have gotten angry with him in the past. I wonder what and I'm sure, you know, it's a little bit like I've told you about executives being worried about social media. Thankfully, he didn't name any names about any negative stuff with executives. But if he could if he wanted to. And I think this is almost a warning shot. And he's like, hey, HBO executives, if you continue to give me a problem, I will sick the fans on you. Now, the only way for the HBO executives or creatives to fight the fans is to do a good job. And then the fans will be like, but you do a good job, so it's okay. But the problem is that they're not. You know, they're having a lot, you know, of course, Game of Thrones infamously went off a cliff, and people had serious issues with House of the Dragon season 2. All right, so yeah, I just thought it was, so that's the start of this, that he's taking, so HBO booked him this interview and he took the opportunity to just really mess up their stuff. All right, so Game of Thrones. Apparently Game of Thrones is too expensive, which I thought was very interesting. They said that's the whole reason they're doing A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, because they were like, is there a property you have, George, that won't cost $20 million an episode? And he was like, here it is. And I would say, yes, it is very, very cheap. You know, it's not a very expensive show, but it's still incredibly good. And I think it really highlights that George R.R. Martin is that guy. He is that good a writer. And he does work, doesn't need dragons and all that other stuff. Although, of course, he already has created a fandom. So, but it's really a great show. It's really, I highly recommend it. It starts this Sunday. I hope that you watch it. So they talked about the fact that for House of the Dragon, the Battle of the Gullet had to be moved, you know, and we all knew that. They said we can't afford it. So that's why season 2 felt not complete, because it just felt like this big setup. The whole season felt like a setup for season 3. I have to say, I thought that House of the Dragon season 2 still performed. People were watching it like crazy on Sunday nights. The memes were hilarious about what was going on with Daemon. It was really a good time. I think we had a fun time with that, and I would still call it a success, especially because, you know, Battle of the Gullet is coming at the beginning of season 3, and that's a great way to get excited about that. So I still, yeah, some of you really loved it. I mean, it was a little bit of a problem. I mean, we knew there were issues with it, but I don't think it was a bad season. Okay. But then also they talked about the fact that they're getting ready to maybe do animation because it's just so expensive. And they're like, maybe we should do some animated series, which I think would do extremely well. I think it would do extremely well to do a Game of Thrones. As long as it's better than that horrible Lord of the Rings movie that Warner Brothers made, I think it would do quite well. But I think what's really great is that they are also considering maybe doing a Game of Thrones movie. Ho, ho, ho. That should be greenlit. I think that's a really great idea. Oh, some of you don't like House of the Dragon season 2. That's interesting. But I think that a movie would be absolutely phenomenal, and I think it would do quite well. So that's exciting. Although, again, Netflix is about to buy them, so I don't know how these decisions would be made going forward. Netflix might be like, what? We're not moving stuff to theatrical. I mean, we're going to let theatrical live, but we're not. And so that's also, put a pin in all of this because, of course, it's going to, Netflix is going to have to be the one probably to ultimately approve this stuff. But then this is where it got nuts, okay? He really went to town on Ryan Condal. My goodness, George R.R. Martin doesn't forget, and he likes his revenge served cold indeed. So he really came after Ryan Condal. Now, he said, I hired Ryan Condal. By the way, full disclosure, I myself interviewed Ryan Condal. He seemed perfectly nice to me, and I had thought that he was doing a very good job with House of the Dragon, but this is pretty bad. Okay, who's Ryan Condal? Ryan Condal is the showrunner and head writer of House of the Dragon. So he said, I hired Ryan Condal. And by the way, we were all like, is that George R.R. Martin's face in that tree in season 2? Remember? We were like, what's happening here? All right, so apparently Ryan Condal got very upset with Miguel Sapochnik, who was the director of many episodes of Game of Thrones and was the co-showrunner of House of the Dragon Season 1. And we were all kind of surprised, considering how good House of the Dragon Season 1 was, that Miguel Sapochnik left. And George R.R. Martin revealed that Ryan Condal got into a fight with Miguel Sapochnik and asked George R.R. Martin to back him against Miguel. I'm sure George R.R. Martin regrets that. And so that seemed to be, it wasn't outrightly said, but it seemed like Miguel Sapochnik was forced out by Ryan Condal what is Ryan Condal? Jeff Johns? That's what it's starting to sound like, which is just terrifying. So that was really shocking to hear that. So season 2. Then he said for season 2, he said, well, season 1 worked out great. With season 2, he started to write notes to Ryan Condal as he always did. However, Ryan Condal stopped really taking the notes and would not answer George R.R. Martin or would be dismissive and say, oh, okay, I'll think about that and never do it. And it got to the point where HBO called up George R.R. Martin and said, hey, he doesn't want your notes directly anymore. Give us your notes and we'll combine them with our notes and give them all to Ryan as one. And George R.R. Martin was like, what? He was like, write that down for later. I mean, that's like really shocking. But then he delivered the death blow when discussing House of the Dragon Season 3. He said, we had a Zoom meeting where the HBO executives and myself sat down with Ryan Condal to discuss his ideas for Season 3. And by the end of the Zoom meeting, George R.R. Martin exclaimed, this is no longer my story. Yee! Yee, yee, yee. That is so bad. And George R.R. Martin, by the way, did not say this directly, but he said, I can't talk about it. I can't say anything. But someone did. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was George R.R. Martin's assistant. Who was like, he can't say anything, but I'll tell you what happened. That was really bad. Now, we're going to see how House of the Dragon Season 3 turned out. But that little gem is waiting in the wings. So it better be good. And I'm now really nervous. What would lead George R.R. Martin to say that? And why would you want to change his work so much? Especially after what happened to Benioff and Weiss. Right? You would be like, I mean, it's funny. They also interviewed the showrunner of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and he's like, I do whatever George says. He said, occasionally I have my own idea, but then George tells me why it's stupid. So great. And by the way, you can't argue with the results. I mean, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is like incredible. Like it's, I think, the best Game of Thrones show they've ever made. So that's just shocking. So we'll see what happens there. So that's really bad. You know, I'm sure HBO, when they read this interview, they were like, didn't we set this interview up for George? Talk about royal intrigue. He stabbed them in the back to get what he wanted because he knows they can't work without him. But at least he did it in the service of his work and his fans. So I think that's pretty crazy. Who does HBO side with? They have a real problem. George R.R. Martin can destroy them. Unless what Ryan Condal did is good. So we'll find out. You know, season 3, you know what will decide the battle of Martin versus Condal? Season 3. All right, if we get lots of dragons, you know, I don't know. I mean, look at it can still happen. I mean, look what happened with Game of Thrones. Thank you, Loy. Look what happened with Game of Thrones. Look at what happened with Stranger Things. Fans really don't take crap anymore. I think fans have become a lot more intelligent and involved, and they'll spot it if it's not good. Ryan's response, that's a good question. Ryan gave like a real, I think he pointed the Hollywood Reporter to a previous comment that he made where he said, I have a lot of respect for George and I'm sure I hope we can get to a place where we can work together again, etc., etc. You're like, it better be good, Ryan. It better be good, you know? It's just like, it was like a real KO. All right, so there are a couple other things I wanted to touch on. I wanted to talk about the idea of authors' ownership. You know, it's hard to be a good writer. And I think that George R.R. Martin, again, particularly after watching A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, where the writing really comes to the forefront because there aren't any fancy bells and whistles anymore, I'm particularly impressed with his ability as a writer. And I would say he is that. As I said, he is that person. He is that good. But there's no denying he can't finish his work, which was a big part of the interview as well. And he's even admitting it at this point. He can't finish it. There's a huge demand for these stories to continue. And what's worse is that he has all the ideas in his head. He says, I know how I want the Game of Thrones story to end. I have several more ideas for Dunk and Egg. I have other stories and spin-offs that I want to tell. They're all in here, but I can't get them on paper. I also think that he's worried about doing something that people maybe won't like, because he says he keeps rewriting what he's written. So he has a real problem, okay? And that he said he loves A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, but he only wrote 3 stories. So can that show only go 3 seasons? Because he can't get the ideas out there. And they said, would you hire another writer? And he said, never. He said, nobody will ever be able to write my work. I will never condone someone else taking over my project. So that's what I want to talk about there. There's a really good example, obviously, of George Lucas. Where is my thing here? George Lucas took Dave Filoni under his wing. There's a great photo of Dave Filoni being like, yes, George, what else? Tell me more. And I think that Dave Filoni does a great job continuing the storytelling of George Lucas, and in fact saved the prequels. And so I think that I would point this out to George R.R. Martin, and I would say, hey, buddy, it can be done. But then I would say something else to him. I would point out, where's my arrow? The magic of Tony Gilroy, and something people have brought up about Star Wars today. Tony Gilroy came along and delivered one of the greatest Star Wars stories and one of the greatest franchise stories, period, of all time. He did it in a way that was totally different than the style of George Lucas. And in fact, it was reported today that Dave Filoni did not like Andor and did not think it was a good show, and probably never would have greenlit it, which is very concerning for him taking over Star Wars and Lucasfilm. You know, as we were talking about yesterday, got to give Kathleen Kennedy her flowers as well as be honest. And that I think that the crown jewel of her time at Lucasfilm was indeed Rogue One and Andor season 1 and 2. So I would say to George, you're so worried about somebody else taking over your writing. What if they were to surprise you? What if you were to find a really gifted writer, and we won't publish anything that you don't approve, but what if you found someone who took your characters and did something that was so brilliant and unexpected that it actually leveled up and expanded your work? And I mean, again, I wish executives would have the guts to have these kinds of discussions with people. That's what a really good executive will do. Okay. I mean, although I'm sure George R. R. Martin doesn't want to hear it. I guess that's what an agent has to do. Although, again, these people just want to cash their checks and they don't want to upset George R. R. Martin because they're getting a lot of money off of him. And that's how some of the horrible things in Hollywood have happened over the years as well. People didn't stop horrible people because they were making so much money off of them, which is really sad and a horrible condemnation of society and business. So I would tell, I mean, I understand where George R. R. Martin is coming from, and he kind of admitted that he didn't even want to write the stuff. A part of him didn't even want to finish all these stories. He just doesn't want to do it anymore. So I'd be like, you gotta find somebody to write this stuff for you, George, because I mean, especially because the ideas are in there. I'd be like, if you have good ideas in your head and story ideas to tell, you gotta get them out. So you gotta help you get them out and on the page, or at least give us the outlines. Like, why would you do that? Okay. So then the last thing I wanted to talk about here was famous authors. They said something at the beginning of the interview that I thought was really interesting. And that's that, nobody wants an AI version of George R. R. Martin. Oh, that would be just the worst thing to ever happen. I would be so upset. I would never want to watch anything that AI had come up with. Ugh, but I bet you that a lot of people would think that was the right way to go. An AI would never come up with Andor. That's the magic of human ability. I guess the Tony Gilroy AI might, if you fed Star Wars into the Tony Gilroy AI. That's really sad. Although Robert Downey Jr. was in a brilliant play about this very thing, which I would recommend. Okay. All right. So they said at the beginning of this interview that George R. R. Martin was probably the only author out there as well known as Stephen King. I thought that was very interesting. And I was like, why aren't more authors as famous? Like you actually not only know their names, but what they look like. And then I thought to myself, what a horrible missed opportunity for JK Rowling. Nobody will even interview her anymore. Maybe some very far right publication would. But how horrible that nobody, even JK Rowling herself, doesn't really want to talk about her work anymore. She just wants to talk about her causes. And again, I think that she has every right to have causes, but I think that she does it with such vitriol and such lack of empathy for others that she might not agree with. That's right, CBS will probably interview her. Oh, that's a great idea for Barry Weiss. But yeah, I just felt it was sad that this is what JK Rowling could have been, and that she wasn't because of what had happened. I don't think Michael Crichton was ever this famous. Like, I think a lot of people don't know. I think they know the name, but I don't think they really know what he looks like or had a sense of what he was like. I think everyone's seen those old photos, right? And then iReady says creatives like R. R. Martin ignore the fact that they also have to make adaptations for people who don't read their books. Well, I think he knows that, which is why he's working with people. Oh, thank you, Andrew. That's such a sweet thing to say, and I'm so glad that you are part of today's live stream. All right, does anybody have any questions or comments about this story before we get on to the final one and then do the Q&A? Oh yeah, I forget who the Hunger Games writer is. I think Suzanne Collins, but I mean, I couldn't pick her out of a crowd. I kind of could. I have a general vague idea of what she looks like. Clarn, you think he's overthinking it? That's probably true. I think that's very true. Uh, well, who said that? Sahib says, Grace, they're going to adapt Aegon's Conquest into either a movie or a show. It's confirmed. Well, they're working on it. It's not confirmed it will actually happen. Like they said, they gave a lot of information about a potential Jon Snow sequel. Kit Harington says he doesn't want to do it. Maybe they could throw enough money at him eventually, but I don't think it's going to happen, to be honest with you. Steven says if X-Men couldn't chart, would Game of Thrones animated? I believe it would. I do really believe that it would. I think Game of Thrones animation would do exceedingly well. Especially if it was on Netflix, by the way. William says, does George have a similar deal with Warner Brothers, like where he has to be involved? No, he actually does not. I don't know. I think that I think they want him to be involved because it helps them with their legitimacy. But it seemed to me, based on the way the article went, that he does not have to be. He does not have to approve it. He said he sold Game of Thrones to Warner Brothers. They own it. All right, let's do the third story. I think we're ready. Okay. All right, this is a quick one. Then we'll do the Q&A. All right. Boom, baby. All right, Cate Blanchett is back. Everybody wondered if she'd come back for How to Train Your Dragon 2, and she is, as Hiccup's mother. I had no doubt that she would, because she is the new Robert De Niro. She will take anything. She will be in any project if you pay her. I liked her in Borderlands. I thought I respected that she did such a good job and took it so seriously, even though it was clearly a paycheck gig. But yeah, I think that, I think she better be careful. Is the video glitchy? I hope it's better now. Okay, I think it is. Yeah. But yeah, I think that she is, I had no doubt that she would take this job. I was sure she would do it. So, live action How to Train Your Dragon, hold on, was extremely well received. It did so well. It was one of the highest grossing movies of the year, and I saw it twice, and I really enjoyed it. Particularly, by the way, in IMAX 3D. That actually turned out great. And I think that, they did a really nice job adapting it to the big screen and live action. I was very happy with how it turned out. And I thought that Hiccup and Stoic wonderfully transitioned to live action, with Gerard Butler and Mason Thames taking over the role. But, Gerard Butler did a great job. He voiced the original character, and I'm sure that Cate Blanchett will look just very similar like her animated version and will be just as on model as Gerard Butler is jumping to live action. I think that's going to be great. But my biggest question here, and I'd be interested to know how you guys feel about it, and that's that can they continue to do shot for shot? I thought that it worked with the first movie because it was a little bit like, I guess, The Force Awakens, where they just wanted to prove that they could do it and they didn't want to take any risks. And so it was fun to go and see it and be like, it's just like what I remembered and they did a great job. But I have to tell you, part of me feels like I would go review it, obviously, as a critic, but as an audience member, I don't know if I'd be as interested in seeing the exact same story in live action again. I feel like the novelty of it has worn off, and that's what made the first live action movie stand out. That's right. They cast from Severance another actor to play Drago, the villain. But I would really like to have more nuance. I like the way Disney does their live action movies. I think Disney does a good job with adding more layers, more depth, different, more modern perspective, and making the stories a little bit more complex. That's what I would prefer. But yeah, I'd be very curious to see how to Train Your Dragon 2 does as another, I hope as another shot-for-shot remake. I just don't think I'd be as interested. Again, the first time I was like, let's see if they can do it. That's right. You're right. It's like Lilo and Stitch, Mystic. It's interesting you bring that up because Lilo and Stitch, well, that made changes that were not good, but they have agreed that for the second film, they're going to do something more complex and a little bit, has more heart. The first Lilo and Stitch live action was very much a cash grab. Let's make more money off this guy. But I think they heard people say, your story sucks. And I think they got a little nervous about that. So I'm curious to see what they do for the second film. That's right, Danny. The Lion King, the second movie was fresh. It was a new story mostly. And I think that I still haven't seen that actually, but it ended up doing pretty well. You know, it didn't open that big, but it did well. All right. Does anybody have comments or questions? I told you this was a quick thing. I just wanted to bring that up. Does anybody have a quick question or comment about this before we go to the Q&A? A Prince of Egypt remake, Justin. Go watch The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. That's a great movie. Fahad's like, Q&A time. Okay, all right. All right, Q&A. I heard you. Well, here we go. All right, let me set my timer for 10 minutes. Here we go. Vlad, I missed your comment. Let's see. Hey, Will. I'm going back, Vlad. If you send a super chat while I'm talking about something else, I might not always see it. Okay. Oh, you were talking about it. How to Train Your Dragon is my favorite show, and I'm sad when the season 3 comes out. It will be surrounded by toxicity. Even if good, can I really enjoy it in peace? I didn't know there was toxicity around the show. I'm sorry to hear that. Fandoms are tough these days. That's right, Sahib. We were mentioning that. It's great that they're going to do another Conjuring. I'm excited. Let's see here. Jico says, is that it for Avengers Doomsday mini trailers, or are they going to keep it and keep going till the Super Bowl? They can't piece out the whole movie. I suspect they're going to wait till the Super Bowl for the next spot. It's not that far away. Muma says, hey, Grace, if you had to put the WB, HBO, Netflix in a nutshell, what do you think is the biggest pro and con of it? I think massive consolidation and loss of opportunity for everybody. It's a monopoly. One word. It creates a monopoly in every sense of the word for every person who's involved. Frank says, George R. R. Martin seems like a nightmare to work with. Oh, you think so? I'm sad for the Amazing House of the Dragon cast and crew who have to deal with all of his drama. But what if his notes are good? I think he always makes good points. I mean, maybe they're like, you mean we could be saying better stuff? Let's see here. Dancing Dog 60 says, oh, Poke, I'm so glad you enjoyed the live streams this week. Why do I think that Hollywood shies away from cheesecake? I think because they don't know how to do it. I think if they did cheesecake well in a powerful way, it would be fine. I think both men and women would be fine with it, just like they're fine with beefcake. But I think that they don't know how to do it without objectifying the subject, and they're nervous about it. Somebody has to take the leap, and hopefully somebody will. Make that Gotham City Sirens movie. Why will nobody make the Gotham City Sirens movie? At least there's a new comic coming out. Danny says, hi, Grace. Loving the stream as always. I love the Bone Temple. Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I mean, people who see it love it, but not a lot of people seem to be going. Atmosphere, the Kennedy announcement didn't make a big, I mean, you're right. I think that pretty much everybody ignored the Kathleen Kennedy story. And I think because A, it had already been announced by Puck News about a week and a half ago, I waited to cover it because I should have covered it then. I didn't know that people would just move on. But I think that people have been just waiting for her to be fired for so long. I think in their minds, a lot of people had already fired her. And so now that it finally came to fruition, you know, but also Star Wars has been on a hold for a long time. They haven't released a movie since before the pandemic. So I think like that's a big part of it. And I also think that people don't believe it's going to change. I think that's what's very scary. I think the lack of interest is really scary. I mean, apparently, I think, you know, it wasn't enough to please people. People are still like, I don't know. I still have a problem with Star Wars. And I think that's a problem. I think they're not going to solve their issue by just getting rid of Kathleen Kennedy. They could have a couple of years ago when people were first calling for it. But because they held on for her so long, I think people believe, and I've seen some people say this, that just while you might get rid of Kathleen Kennedy, that doesn't mean her thought process isn't still ingrained in the company that she built. Because she built the Disney version of Lucasfilm. So I think you're only going to prove it, and people are going to really be skeptical. So that's another problem. You're only going to prove it once they start releasing content. And even then, it'll have to be like a couple. I'll have to do a bunch of it for people to really feel the curse has been broken. Because look at the Bone Temple, great movie. Less people are going to see it. They don't care about the critics and audience scores. I didn't hear Claremont saying that Famke Janssen was coming back. I hope he didn't ruin it. I hope he didn't pull a Robert Kirkman who ruined that poor situation for Stephen Yeun. That's right, the deck officer. Kathleen Kennedy ignored Lucas's notes as well. Was 50 Shades cheesecake? Not at all. Not at all. Dakota Johnson, who I think is a great actress. Maybe not great, but very, very talented. She's not cheesecakey at all. She's very much for women, the female gaze, Gaze. So I wouldn't call that cheesecake. Sydney Sweeney is cheesecake. Scarlett Johansson in some roles. She's moved away from that, but Scarlett Johansson was cheesecake. That's what cheesecake is. Tiana Taylor, cheesecake. Do you think Adriana Arona has a chance of playing Wonder Woman? I think as more time goes by, it gets less interesting. I think she had a really good moment there, but I'm not sure. She is dating Jason Momoa, who's very close with James Gunn, so I think that continues to be her ace in the hole. Din says, do you think there's a chance we'll see Halle Berry return as Storm? I really hope so. I think, again, I think that would always haunt the movie if she didn't come back, even at least for one scene. Jico, I don't want a shot for shot by Tangled, especially because you have Michael Gracie. Michael Gracie is such an inventive director. Why wouldn't you let him go off and be able to do something interesting? Who said that? Elliot. Margot Robbie is cheesecake. Great point. Margot Robbie's definitely cheesecake. Her Harley Quinn, Margot Robbie doesn't have the same physique. Well, she does now, actually, in Wuthering Heights. Margot Robbie, I think, tried to move away from cheesecake as well, but her Harley Quinn, particularly in the first Suicide Squad movie, when she was her most successful, was very cheesecake. And she's doing that again in Wuthering Heights. When do you think we'll see The Bride again? You mean James Gunn's Bride? I don't know. Doc says women don't need to be cheesecake to appreciate them. That's great. I love it. I love that. It's a great. I wish a ton of men felt that way. Clayface trailer soon? I don't think so. That movie doesn't come out till September. You probably won't get a look at that until Comic-Con, I would think. I mean, they're promoting Supergirl. Faye says, thoughts on Zach Krieger's Resident Evil movie? I've heard some rumors that it'll be super violent and more accurate to the games. I think he's going to knock it out of the park. There was a bidding war. Zach Krieger, I think, is really a very talented filmmaker. And I think he knows. He's smart, too. And he knows that being accurate to the source material will help him considerably. Oh, of course, movies, TV reviews. I'm definitely going to review The Bride from Warner Brothers, Maggie Gyllenhaal's upcoming film. That looks incredible to me. And Nightcrawler asked me about that as well. People asked me about that trailer yesterday. I thought it looked amazing. Brandon says, here in Minneapolis, watching as you're going to Whole Foods for mac and cheese and chicken tenders. They do indeed make good mac and cheese and chicken tenders at Whole Foods. So great choice. I'm honored to be a part of that journey. Deck officer, I'm glad you thought Starfleet Academy was good, but it's getting review bombed, I saw over on Rotten Tomatoes. AK Channel TV wants to point out that George R.R. Martin never said anything bad about Benioff and Weiss, so you think Condal might be the issue. I think the fact that he had a problem with Miguel Sapochnik as well is really a red flag. Ladie says, hi, Grace. Thank you. That's very sweet of you, Miss Randolph. I like that. If I can ask, how much does The Mandalorian and Grogu have to do at the box office in order to justify it if Star Wars is still a success or not? I think it has to do like what around Superman did. I think it would have to do like around 600, on the high side. I think if it comes in where the Marvel movies came in 2025, it will have an issue. I don't think it needs to make $1 billion. Obviously, Kathleen Kennedy would like that, but it has to do significantly better than Solo did I think, do I think it will, Lucas? That's a good question. I'd have to see more about it. I haven't seen, there's really only been like a highlight reel. I think it could. I think it's a very good release for Memorial Day weekend. I think a lot of people, even if they're on the line, will be like, maybe, why not? Because I think that people like the show for the most part. I Am Zion says heated rivalries, very beefcake. Well, there's a lot of beefcake these days. Hollywood knows that beefcake works for them. I don't think that Supergirl is cheesecake at all, Deck Officer. Not at all. And maybe it should have been. We'll see how it performs. I mean, Black Widow, when she started out as a character, was extremely cheesecake. Alberto says Mando will do like the Fantastic Four. That would be really bad. I would like to see a 6 in front of the Mandalorian and Grogu at the least. Oh, Ben, I'm so glad you like The Pit. It's such a good show. Oh, Brandon, yes, I thought of that when you said where you were. I hope things work out. All right, that's the 10 minutes. I had a great time with you guys as always, and thank you for joining for so many live streams this week. We got a lot going on next week. Let me look at my schedule. Movie Math, of course, on Sunday. I have some really fun stuff planned for next week, and then the week after there'll be more really awesome reviews. Mateo says, I think Star Wars should release new stories in theaters. Releasing basically the next level of streaming show is what ruined Marvel. It's a concern. It's definitely a concern. But The Mandalorian and Grogu, hopefully you don't have to have watched the show to enjoy the movie. So let's see. But that might be kind of sucky for people who watch the show who are like, I don't need to be caught up on all this. All right, everybody. Bye-bye. Happy Friday. Bye-bye.